It's a case that has shocked, puzzled and divided the public like no other.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please don't scare her. We beg you to let Madeleine come home.
For 10 years, I've been following an investigation which many argue was flawed from the start.
Madeleine McCann deserved a proper police investigation.
We talk to senior police officers who have been closely involved.
The only side I'm on is the side of Madeleine McCann.
We need to know, not only because the family need to know, but very much because we want to know what was done the right way and what should have been done in a different way.
10 years on, we can now reveal details of a secret government report. It lays bare the failures of all the agencies involved in the search for Madeleine.
I'm not certain that it was investigated properly at the beginning, and I still don't think it's been investigated properly now.
It's 10 years since Madeleine McCann vanished, and I'm still fascinated by the mystery of what happened to her. I've come to Vienna to meet a man who once convinced Madeleine's parents he could find her.
Darnie. Hi, how are you? Fine.
Let's go and have some lunch. Darnie Krugel also wants to hand over to me something of Madeleine's he needs to give back to her parents. Mr. Krugel is a former South African police officer. This is the bizarre gadget he invented. He claimed it linked DNA science with satellite technology. Simply insert a hair sample and it can locate a missing person, alive or dead.
I met Jerry and Kate in Praia de Luz, and they said my commitment to assisting. I said, I've developed this technology. It's early stages yet, but I will do my best.
It was 2 months after Madeleine had disappeared, and the McCanns were desperate. This is what Kate wrote later in her book. Desperation does strange things to people. We're scientists, and we don't believe in hocus-pocus or crackpot inventions. Since the investigation appeared to have ground to a halt, it was worth trying anything. What else did we have?
What then happened? Jerry came back with this specific brush. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of hair samples on the brush. We were looking for Madeleine. I had the first signal from 900 meters to the beach. I knew she was there. So I did my findings. I showed the area to the police, and I gave them the map to say this is the area of priority to search.
Police never searched the area Mr. Krugel identified.
This is, you've read this, have you? Kate's book. She said that British police discussed it with a professor who described your machine as pseudo-science fiction. This was the professor in Belfast. Logic, it seems, often flies out of the window when you're under pressure and desperate for a result, any result.
I know my findings. I know Madeleine was there when I was there, most probably still there. I've got nothing to prove for anybody. I've had a lot of successes. I found a lot of bodies.
There's one page on the internet that says, Darnie Krugel, visionary or fraudster. Which is it?
Martin, I think there's one thing in life. The truth will stand, and the lie will die.
After 10 years, the brush was on its way back to Madeleine's parents. Darnie Krugel's involvement in the investigation illustrates some of the early themes of the Madeleine McCann story. The oddballs who attach themselves to the case, the desperation of the McCanns to cling to anything that might help, the couple's disillusion with the police, and the continuing fascination with the fate of a little girl who appears to have vanished into thin air. Madeleine McCann was nearly 4 when she disappeared from the family's holiday apartment in Portugal in 2007. Her parents, Kate and Jerry, both doctors, had taken her and her younger twin siblings for a week's stay. Praia da Luz is a large village on the Algarve coast, an hour's drive from the airport at Faro. It's a quiet resort, popular mainly with British, German and Dutch holidaymakers. The McCanns had rented apartment number 5A, the ground floor corner property in the Ocean Club complex. The family travelled with 7 friends and their friends' young children. We asked a former Scotland Yard cold case expert to go over the investigation with us. Colin Sutton brought 2 notorious criminals to justice: serial killer Levi Belfield and Delroy Grant, the so-called Night Stalker rapist who attacked over 100 elderly women in their homes. Let's look at the last few hours. This is the last known photograph of Madeleine. Taken around 2:30 in the afternoon, she's sitting by the pool in the holiday complex. Later, at around 8:30, her parents joined their friends for dinner within the complex at the tapas restaurant. They'd left the children asleep in one room in the apartment at the top of this map. Jerry McCann once said early on this was akin to sitting in your garden at home on a summer's evening, having dinner with the children asleep upstairs. It wasn't quite like that, was it?
It's about 80 yards as the crow flies to the tapas restaurant. There are shrubs there alongside the alley. There's no real way of monitoring that apartment from the tapas bar.
According to the McCanns and their friends, every half an hour or so, somebody from the group was going to check on their own children.
Yeah.
Now, the McCanns' children were all in the same room, which was the front bedroom of the apartment.
The patio doors here were left shut but unlocked, and then there's a journey through here to the children's bedrooms. You'll see Madeleine was in this bed here, the twins in the cots in the middle. And the important thing there is that Kate McCann says that when she came up to look, that this door, which had been left just ajar, was wide open.
Yes, it was 10 p.m. when Kate made that final journey back to the apartment. It was her turn to go and check on the kids. Crucially, there was no sign of Madeleine.
If you look at the crime scene photos here, which were taken shortly after on the night, this is Madeleine's bed here. You'll see her pink cuddle cat sort of security toy there. You'll see the cots where the twins had been. And you'll see the window. The window's important as well, because Kate McCann said that when she went in, she found the window, which had been shut, was open, and that the shutter had been raised.
We're just hearing that a search is underway for a 3-year-old British girl who's gone missing in the Algarve area of Portugal.
She's answers to the name of Madeleine or Maddie. There were a few police and police dogs that were searching the area, but there doesn't seem to be much activity at the moment.
Let's look at the initial police response in that golden hour. What exactly does the golden hour mean?
It's really the initial opportunities to find intelligence, information, look through systems and see what action can be taken to resolve whatever incident it is as quickly as possible. I mean, things that are done or not done more often can have a very large impact on the way the investigation or the incident proceeds thereafter.
Particularly the collection of forensic evidence?
I can well understand that the initial officers that responded to it will see as their priority to look for her, to try and find her. And they won't be thinking forensic evidence, they won't be thinking major crime scene, they'll be thinking, let's find this little girl.
Local police, the GNR, did respond on the night, and by the next morning there was a great deal of police activity.
The GNR, they're the gendarmerie, they're soldiers effectively who police the rural parts of Portugal. They are geared up to search for a missing child, but they're not geared up for a high-tech 21st century major crime investigation. It's a question of timing, it's a question of how long that goes on and how long somebody's got grip of the situation, a supervisor or a leader who says, do you know what, we've been searching now for 2 hours, we need to go back and make sure we preserve that scene because we could be looking at something much more long-term and much more serious here. We mustn't apply our standards in the UK too strictly to what goes on in other places. They have a different system, they have different police forces dealing with different aspects of the law.
At least during the first moments after the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, it was not really a criminal investigation. It was more a rescue operation, and that was very much in everyone's mind. The family, but also the police officers, neighbors, anyone that attended the place, and was looking for a child that was missing.
When
the investigation began, hours had already passed. I don't know if 7, 8, and this is enough for evidence to vanish. If she was abducted in those 6, 7 hours, they had time to take her to Spain or put her in a plane or in a boat.
It's accepted not enough was done to collect vital evidence. That didn't happen for weeks. In fact, the apartment was let out to other families twice before it was sealed off for a full forensic examination. In the first investigation, the Portuguese took the lead. Back home, Leicestershire police coordinated the response. But numerous UK agencies became involved once the search for Madeleine escalated into a criminal investigation.
From Leicestershire Constabulary to CEOP, through all of the different ACPO portfolios, right up to the Home Office and the Home Secretary themselves, everyone was wanting to do something to help. I think in the chaos that followed, we lost some ground.
The early confusion was detailed in a secret report ordered by the Home Office, and we've got a copy of it. It reveals an astonishing catalogue of mistakes, accusations, and growing distrust. What do you make of it?
I think we see in there that the various agencies and parties that were involved in the early parts of the investigation had different priorities, and they sometimes competed against each other. And I think we will see that they hampered the investigation from the very start.
It's been 10 years since Madeleine McCann vanished without trace from her family's holiday apartment in Portugal.
In the last few minutes, we've seen Mr. and Mrs. McCann being driven away by what we think were police officers.
The first Portuguese investigation got off to a poor start, and it never recovered. Early on, tensions grew between the McCanns and those who were trying to help them.
Things are not equal in legal system in UK and in Portugal. It's not my fault, it's not your fault.
I've got hold of a secret government report that details the problems that arose from the beginning, not just in the Portuguese investigation, but in the reaction of the British authorities too. The then Home Secretary Alan Johnson commissioned the scoping report in 2009. It led to the involvement of Scotland Yard.
With all due respect to Leicestershire Police, the way the constabularies work in Britain is, you know, there's the Metropolitan, which is huge and has huge resources and huge expertise, and there's the rest. So Jerry and Kate McCann felt that Leicestershire just didn't have the wherewithal to conduct this properly.
The Home Secretary turned to child protection specialist Jim Gamble to advise him. Was it worth getting Scotland Yard involved?
I suggested that we carried out a scoping review to identify whether there were any investigative opportunities that had been missed and deliver a better investigation. Officials were set against it. I think that's fair to say.
So much of this had been haphazard in the way it had been investigated, particularly those early Portuguese investigations, that actually Madeleine McCann deserved a proper police investigation, and they hadn't had one up to that stage.
The confidential report said relationships were strained by cultural, procedural and legal differences, and the UK was accused of acting like a colonial power.
That was about resentment.
About the attitude of British law enforcement.
Yes, about the kind of, a hierarchical approach, perhaps a condescending approach.
It was in that context that the rest of the initial Portuguese investigation played out. In the first week, police chased false leads and mistaken sightings. The McCanns held numerous impromptu news conferences.
Words cannot describe the anguish and despair that we are feeling as the parents of our beautiful daughter Madeleine.
The search area expanded around the village and beyond. On the 11th day, police formally questioned Robert Murat, apparently on little more than a journalist's warning about his odd behaviour. He was later cleared of all suspicion. They also interrogated his girlfriend, Michaela Valtuk. and a business associate named Sergei Malinka.
Robert Murat was helping the police as a translator. He's an expat. He was living at the time 150 yards up the street.
Historically, people who have kind of inserted themselves into the centre stage in investigations have been viewed with some suspicion by the police, and rightly so in some cases.
The next morning when he was released, he wouldn't appear on camera, but he told me that he was innocent. He said that he felt he was being made a scapegoat, and his real fear was that this was going to ruin his life. And of course he was eventually let go with no further action.
Yes.
As the search for Madeleine went on, her parents put their faith in God. The village church became an almost daily refuge. In Fatima, Portugal's holiest site, they prayed at the shrine of the Virgin Mary. In Rome, they met the Pope. He blessed a photograph of Madeleine. Thousands of supporters tied yellow ribbons to await Madeleine's safe return. While all this was happening, Portuguese detectives were making a crucial error, according to the author of the secret Home Office report.
I was shocked, first and foremost, when the McCanns weren't immediately, under the Portuguese system, considered suspects. That was the first a critical mistake. It was unfair for the investigators, unfair with regards to the integrity of the forensic evidence that would be captured, and unfair to the McCanns themselves. Clear the ground beneath your feet, first and foremost.
According to the Home Office report, statistics suggest that in the majority of cases where very young children go missing and are later found dead, the family is involved. In addition to not questioning the McCanns as suspects, the report says the UK team felt more could have been done by the Portuguese police to record quicker the details of all employees. And there was a lack of confidence that enough work had been done around potential witnesses and suspects.
One of the big holes in what went on in the investigation, these sorts of cases, what you need to do, what you want to do, is to snapshot the area. Leicestershire police, who were assisting at the time, would have had reasonably easy access to all the British people that were either working at the complex or indeed were there on holiday.
Not looking properly at staff who were working at the complex, they're all the people you need to talk to.
Particularly where you've got people who haven't got roots in the area, don't live nearby, but are there temporarily.
It's easy to criticise the original Portuguese investigation, but is it entirely fair?
We looked at how you can compare and contrast what might happen on a sleepy night in Bournemouth if a Portuguese couple had lost a child. So we tried to compare it more like with like, but you know, this isn't about being territorial, but the Portuguese system did not come up to the standards that we would expect. It simply didn't.
Such criticism of the original Portuguese investigators by their British counterparts still irritates today.
Everyone that was involved in the investigation did their best. It was very much committed in doing their job the best way they could.
Everyone did all they could in the investigation. Let me tell you, in the world, there are millions and millions of cases that are never solved. It is difficult to solve the abduction of a child or a disappearance.
Almost 2 months after Madeleine disappeared, a news report revealed a pact of silence. It said police were suspicious of her parents' involvement. The article in the weekly paper Sol said the McCanns and their friends were thought to be hiding something. This was the first public indication of where the early investigation was focused. Portuguese police asked British authorities to bring over 2 specialist dogs, one who detects dead bodies, the other traces of blood. The dogs reacted in the McCann's apartment and in the family's rental car, which wasn't hired until 3 weeks after Madeleine disappeared. Forensic swabs were taken and sent to the UK for analysis. The leaked results, or at least the Portuguese interpretation of them, caused a sensation.
In the car, the scientists have also found a second fall match. And police say that is the most damning evidence that's been returned by these forensic test results. The dogs, the forensic tests that followed, that was the turning point, wasn't it?
It was the turning point for the arrests, yes, certainly. But you need to remember that the dogs are there to indicate areas where proper forensic tests, evidential tests, should be made. Dogs, certainly in the UK, are not used as evidential things. It's just an indication to focus the search for forensic material.
4 months after their daughter vanished, her parents were questioned and then released. Their formal status, arguido, meant they were suspects.
No charges have been brought against them. The investigation continues. Jerry, your reaction?
A devastating turn of events which did nothing for their poor relationship with the police. It simply got worse. According to the secret Home Office report, the McCanns complained of a lack of clarity and communication with the Portuguese police, and they said they were left for hours waiting to speak to someone. They described the situation as inhumane. It led to a long-lasting, distinct lack of trust between all parties, the McCanns, the Portuguese police and the UK authorities. It's criticism that the Portuguese reject.
It was not a contest. It wasn't a show. So we weren't really looking for approval from anyone. We just wanted to do our job the best way we could.
Kate McCann describes in her book her struggle with the disappearance of her daughter and everything that followed.
On the whole, Jerry and I have managed to dig deep and remain focused, although the temptation to shout the truth from the rooftops has always been there. I've had to keep saying to myself, I know the truth, we know the truth, and God knows the truth. And one day, the truth will out.
I'm Martin Brunt, and for the past 10 years, I've been reporting on the disappearance of Madeleine McCann from her holiday apartment in Portugal. Her parents, Kate and Jerry, were questioned by detectives who suspected their daughter had died accidentally and they had disposed of her body. "48 hours later, the McCanns left Portugal and flew home to Leicestershire with their 2 younger children.
Whilst it's heartbreaking to return to the UK without Madeleine, it does not mean we're giving up our search for her.
They were still suspects in that first Portuguese investigation, a position that would remain for another 10 months. In July 2008, the investigation was closed. The McCanns were told there would be no further action taken against them.
It took me a long time to close the case, until finally I convinced myself that at the time there was no evidence at all.
In 2008, when it was closed for the first time, that didn't mean that Polícia Judiciária wasn't going to keep looking for information, keep looking for some kind of clue.
According to the secret Home Office report, the McCanns felt the original Portuguese investigation was inadequate, and so they had to take matters into their own hands. The McCanns sued Leicestershire police because they felt they weren't telling them what was being done to find their daughter. The force eventually agreed to give them some information. The McCanns had already been using a number of different private investigators. The confidential Home Office report reveals that the private investigators working for the McCanns gathered a large amount of information which does not appear to have been shared fully with Portuguese or UK police. The report recommends the McCanns are encouraged and persuaded to share this information. The document adds that it's unusual for private investigators and police to work together, but because of the unique nature of the case, it would be good to do so. The McCanns hired their own investigators because for the best part of 3 years, there was no official inquiry. But that changed in 2011, when Portuguese police decided to review their first investigation.
We thought that after all those years, it was time to just go back, look at it, and to see if we have missed something.
The Home Office report, commissioned by Alan Johnson, recommended that Scotland Yard get involved, and that's what happened. First, the Metropolitan Police reviewed the case and then launched their own investigation, Operation Grange, in 2013.
However, it was relayed to the Portuguese, joint operation or whatever. It'd be Scotland Yard that was now putting an awful lot of resource and expertise into this.
This case is unusual. It's not in Scotland Yard's remit to investigate crimes across the world normally. In this case, in 2011, the Portuguese and British Prime Ministers were discussing the case and agreed that Scotland Yard would be asked to help.
Some detectives greeted it as a challenge. Others considered it a poisoned chalice. Colin, in 2010, your name was being talked about to head up the Scotland Yard investigation. What happened?
I did receive a call from a very senior Metropolitan Police officer who knew me and said that it wouldn't be a good idea for me to head this investigation on the basis that I wouldn't be happy conducting an investigation where I was told where I could go and where I couldn't go, the things I could investigate and the things I couldn't.
What do you think your caller was getting at?
The Scotland Yard investigation was going to be very narrowly focused, and that focus would be away from any suspicion of wrongdoing on the part of the McCanns or the Tapas friends.
Now, you're not saying that you were aware of any evidence against them and they had been ruled out by the Portuguese investigation, but why would it have been important for you to have included formally interviewing the McCanns and their friends?
If you are conducting a re-investigation, start at the very beginning, look at all the accounts, all the evidence, all the initial statements, and go through them and make sure they stack up and they compare.
Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood led a Scotland Yard team of 29. They examined 40,000 documents and identified 600 individuals of some interest. The new investigation came after a personal appeal by the McCanns to the then Prime Minister, David Cameron.
They say that there is new evidence, new leads to follow, new things to be done. It was a case that did shock and still shocks the nation.
Scotland Yard began its investigation in July 2013. 3 months later, detectives used the BBC's Crime Watch show to announce they had made a breakthrough. At the top of the programme, DCI Redwood explained he was going right back to the start.
Reanalyse and reassess everything, accepting nothing.
But we have established that he didn't do that. We found Scotland Yard's original remit statement. It sets out its purpose like this. This will entail a review of the whole of the investigations which have been conducted into the circumstances of Madeleine McCann's disappearance. So far, neutral language. But then it goes on to say, it is to examine the case and seek to determine as if the abduction occurred in the UK. It appears that right from the start, the British investigators had the same narrow focus that concerned Colin Sutton. They had accepted Madeleine was abducted, and so her parents were never questioned formally.
The parents' involvement, that was dealt with at the time by the original investigation by the Portuguese. Say all the material, we're happy that's completely dealt with. She wasn't old enough to make a decision to set off and start her own life. However she left that apartment, she's been abducted.
Unlike Scotland Yard, the Portuguese police believe there could be other explanations.
Do you accept that she was abducted?
We don't know what happened, and we have to be prepared to deal with different scenarios.
A revelation made in BBC's Crime Watch programme was about this picture. For a long time, this artist's impression was thought to be vital evidence. The man was seen by one of the McCann friends, Jane Tanner, carrying a child at 9:15 p.m, 45 minutes before Madeleine was discovered missing. She didn't think anything of it at the time, but later believed she could have witnessed Madeleine's abduction. But Andy Redwood appeared to rule out the sighting altogether.
There was a night crash that was operating from the main Ocean Club reception, and 8 families had left 11 children in there. And one particular family we spoke to, they themselves believed that they could be the Tanner sighting. We're almost certain now that this sighting is not the abductor.
So if our mystery man was picking his child up here at the night crash, and Jane Tanner sees him walking across the top of this T-junction going in that direction, that must mean that he's had to take a long route all the way round here. And if he's going in this direction, why didn't he just simply walk through one of the paths from there?
We saw DCI Redwood there say, I'm almost certain that this man from the crash is the man in the sighting. I'm not convinced.
Confusingly, despite being ruled out by the police, the drawing is still prominent on the official McCann website and is the subject of an appeal for information. Scotland Yard's focus then settled on a different suspect and 2 artists' impressions of a man seen carrying a child towards the beach at around 10 p.m. The Scotland Yard investigation looked broadly at 2 theories. One, a planned abduction. Witnesses told police they'd seen a number of men acting suspiciously in the days before. Some of the men claimed to be charity collectors.
Your paper people.
Authors Anthony Summers and Robin Swan researched the case for their book and highlighted the mystery charity collectors.
A man or 2 men asked if they could have a contribution to an orphanage that they said was in a village nearby. A village nearby called Espeech. I've been to Espeech, and it turns out that there is no orphanage there.
A second Scotland Yard theory was a burglary gone wrong. The idea that Madeleine had woken up and disturbed a thief who, instead of fleeing, had attacked her and carried her off. To the public, it may sound unlikely. It certainly did to the Portuguese police, but not to their British colleagues.
In my experience, if you try to apply cold, rational logic of a normal person sat in their front room to what criminals do under pressure, you tend to make mistakes. So it was a sensible hypothesis. It's still not entirely ruled out.
But my sources in Portugal told me the burglary gone wrong theory pursued by Scotland Yard was never considered seriously by Portuguese detectives. Portuguese and Scotland Yard had different suspects, and we tracked down one of them. 10 years on, police seem no nearer to solving the mystery of Madeleine's disappearance. I've been looking at what's gone wrong. A key source of evidence in any modern crime investigation is mobile phone data. In this case, according to this secret Home Office report, there was lots of it, but it was badly handled by Portuguese investigators. The report says a vast amount of cell site data has been gathered. There is no evidence to indicate that the data has been fully investigated or analysed. The Portuguese should be encouraged to accept UK help. How vital to the original police investigation would that have been, a more thorough analysis of the mobile phone data?
It could have been very helpful indeed. It's mobile phone traffic analysis is vital to many investigations these days. And there are 3 reasons for that. If you get the opportunist who forgets to switch the phone off, and so you have the data which shows that the criminal was present at the time or whatever. Secondly, you've got the criminal who does understand and know about mobile phone data, but simply forgets to turn it off. And thirdly, even if they do turn it off, sometimes that itself can be evidential, because if you've got somebody who's using their phone all day, every day, not just for calls and texts, but for apps as well, and suddenly there's a gap where they switch the phone off, and the only time they ever switch the phone off is when the crime happens, there's some evidential value in that too. It's led them to some people I think they wanted to speak to.
Scotland Yard had 4 suspects. They were linked by their use of mobile phones, their backgrounds, and their location on the night Madeleine disappeared. The Metropolitan Police asked the Portuguese to invite them and others to be interviewed in 2014. The four were questioned and made arguidos, suspects. José Carlos da Silva was one of them. He was a driver at the holiday complex when Madeleine vanished. He and the others were interrogated by Portuguese police with questions supplied by Scotland Yard.
We had some descriptions to work with, and that led to us identifying a group of people who it was worth pursuing. We did lots of searches, we worked with the Portuguese, they were spoken to, and we pretty much closed off that group of people.
Another of those questioned was a Russian-born computer specialist, Sergei Malinka. It wasn't the first time Mr. Malinka had been questioned. He was interrogated soon after Madeleine vanished, but was never made a formal suspect then. He spoke to Sky News 10 years ago.
They confirmed that I'm a witness, not a suspect. So basically, I'm just going to wait for further investigation to see what's going on.
The new Portuguese investigation focused on a series of sex attacks on young, sleeping children at resorts along the coast. There were 3 here at Albufeira, 2 at Carvoeiro and another at Silves.
In most cases, the child involved was 8, 9, 10 years old, but in one case, the child was just 3 years old.
There were some 50-odd files on sexual predators that had been forwarded to the Portuguese police by the British police that the British were not convinced had all been thoroughly investigated.
A former Ocean Club waiter, Euclides Monteiro, was identified by Portuguese police as a suspect for the sex attacks and possibly for Madeleine's abduction.
We've thought at the time that there were enough reasons for us to believe that this could have been the work of one person, and that one person could also have been responsible for Madeleine McCann's disappearance.
DNA tests eventually ruled out Mr. Monteiro, but even before he'd become a suspect, he was dead, killed in a tractor accident in 2009.
What this shows is that we've got 2 police forces working hundreds of miles apart and pursuing different suspects.
It's difficult for 2 adjacent UK police forces to have a joint investigation. When you then multiply the differences over a language barrier, cultural differences and 2 different criminal justice systems, then I think you're always going to come up with a tension and possibly with different results.
What if Madeleine wasn't the victim of a crime? What if she had simply woken up, wandered off and fallen into a roadwork trench which was left open that night? Former RAF navigator John Ballinger lives nearby and had alerted police to the possibility.
The most likely thing, if she had been in there, was that she fell on the spoil and the whole lot slid down and she was covered by all the soil and things that had been excavated.
Portuguese authorities insisted that all roadworks had been inspected the next morning before they were filled in. In June 2014, Scotland Yard checked part of the sewage system nearby. For all the theories, Madeleine's parents cling to one simple fact. There is no evidence their daughter has come to any harm. It gives them hope that she is still alive.
You have to keep going, and especially when you've got other children involved. And, you know, some of that is subconscious. I think your mind and body just take over to a certain extent. One of our goals, obviously ultimately finding Madeleine, was to ensure that Sean and Emily have a very normal, happy and fulfilling life.
Before Madeleine was taken, we felt we'd managed to achieve a little perfect nuclear family of 5. And we had that for a short period, and you adapt and you have a new normality, and unfortunately for us, our new normality at the minute is a family of 4.
They are not alone in their hope. Children missing for longer than Madeleine have been found and brought home. The campaigner, who more than anybody has kept the McCanns from complete despair, is Ernie Allen. He's the former president of the US National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children, and he knows that miracles can happen.
It is realistic
to think that Madeleine McCann is still alive. Somebody knows. And if we can find that one person, even 10 years later, who has information they were not willing to share 10 years earlier for whatever reason, and ask them to come forward now, at a minimum, we can provide some sense of justice for Jerry and Kate McCann.
There's no British equivalent of Ernie Allen's Missing Child Centre, but the Home Office report did recommend one to avoid the confusion and ill feeling that so dogged the first Madeleine investigation.
So in a national centre of that source, you would have officers seconded from different European forces. You would be working with them on the ground, training, applying the lessons, building the bridges, so that actually when something happened, we were moving as a collective as opposed to individuals in a team sport.
Nothing's happened in the ensuing 10 years that suggests that if it happened again, there'd be any better, more coordinated response.
Today, there's little to remind anybody of the tragedy that happened here. At the village church, prayers are said for Madeleine every week. But gone are the photographs, the posters, the appeals for information. There's graffiti, but it's negative.
Portuguese people will say, why did they leave their children alone? We don't do that. We take our kids with us to the restaurant. It's not fair, but it's the way that it is. People look to apportion blame. They're trying to understand. There is nothing, we don't know what happened.
Over the years, Kate and Jerry McCann have been the target of extraordinary internet abuse, some of which includes death threats. Recently, an apparent picture of the couple and their children eating at a restaurant was shared on social media. It prompted a range of comments, suggesting spitting in their food and throwing beer in their faces. The police have never taken action against any of their online attackers.
I hope those people that have said and done things that were cruel and unkind and unnecessary in the absence of evidence reflect on the part they'll have played in creating a legacy of bile on the internet.
It's difficult to understand the continuing widespread hostility towards the McCanns. They've acknowledged they were wrong to leave the children on their own. And 2 police forces have found no evidence that they played any part in their daughter's disappearance. In our investigation, we discovered nothing to suggest otherwise. The mystery of what happened to Madeleine McCann is still just that, a mystery. There's no firm evidence to explain what happened. There's no happy ending, no tragic ending. There's no ending at all.
If you were in charge today, what would you be doing? What more could you be doing?
Here and now, where we are now, I would be saying we need to start this again from the beginning and look at absolutely everything. Because unless that's done, I fear the Scotland Yard investigation will just peter out and we may never know.
So are you saying that the past 6 years, £12 million has all been a waste?
I suppose I am, because we're not really any further forward. We're not any closer now to knowing what happened to Madeleine on that night. And I think we could have been.
The Portuguese and Metropolitan Police both admit their relationship has sometimes been fraught, but they now say they're working closely together.
I know we have a significant line of inquiry which is worth pursuing, and because it's worth pursuing, it could provide an answer, but until we've gone through it, I won't know whether we're going to get there or not.
What area is that focusing on?
We've got a significant line of inquiry. We can fish around this as much as you want. Ourselves and the Portuguese are doing a critical piece of work, and we don't want to spoil it by putting tidbits of information out publicly.
The relationship between the Metropolitan Police and the Police Judiciary, it's of a cooperative one. Our 2 investigations are not dependent one of each other. But it is being important for us to have the Metropolitan Police working side by side with us.
I so wish I could say that we will solve this.
From my point of view, somebody knows what's happened.
Whatever it takes, for as long as it takes, but there's still hope that we can find Madeleine.
If you would like to explore more of the details of the Madeleine McCann case, including material from the original investigation, go to our website at news.sky.com.